You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast, our 28th episode, and it is with a heavy heart that we today are going over the final episode of Season 2, Strange New Worlds, entitled Hegemony. And fellas, joining me as always, Lord Uther, and today we have Chet Donnelly, our recurring host, who is no longer a guest, a permanent host. And if you don't remember Chet Donnelly, Chet comes from weird science, and that's all I'll need to say.
If he pukes, you die.
You got it, Chet. So today, we are again doing the Coffee and Trek morning recording of the Warp Core podcast, and I thought I'd bring a little treat. Unfortunately, we're not together, so I can't share it with the group, but it is a homemade / space age material, because I bought it in a store, and that is a strawberry coffee cake in the vein of our beloved Captain Pike, who loves to cook for the crew. I would cook for the crew, but the crew's not here. And also, I didn't have time to cook because I woke up a little late.
Yummy.
Our Season 2 closure brings us to the point we've been waiting for all season, and that is our encounter with the Gorn. They've been at the periphery all season. We've been talking about them in every episode. When are they going to show up? When are they going to show up? And by the way, I'd like to say that it affirmed my forecast for the character we were going to see enter the series. But I don't want to give away too much, because as usual, our background information is going to come straight out of Compton. Chet Donnelly, take us through episode 10.
Thank you, Urza Master. Thank you, Lord Uther, and thanks to you at home. Yes, we are here at the second season finale of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, episode 20. Each season has produced 10 episodes thus far, which means we are still 6 episodes short of the Next Generation's season 1, where they put in an elastic 26 episodes in their initial run. So we still, in 2 seasons, have not matched the inaugural season of Star Trek Next Generation way back in 1987. But a little bit more on that, perhaps, later in the episode. It was directed by Maha Verveel. This was the first episode that Maha directed this season, but not the first Strange New Worlds. We were first introduced to them in season 1, episode 2. It was the Children of the Comet episode. That was an Uhura forward episode where she was communicating or attempting to communicate with aliens through music. And we had a comet that was going to strike a planet that the Enterprise had to try and make so it would not destroy all life, and instead brought water vapor to a drought-ravaged society. So that was a memorable early episode in the first season, and so Maha has come back. The episode was written by executive producer and showrunner Henry Alonso Myers, and I've always said, whether it was NBC's ER or Game of Thrones or Mad Men or any of the shows you've been watching in the last 25 years, when your show's principal authority, the showrunners or executive producers or whatever, when you see their names on episode writing credits, pay attention because they want you to. And when you see their names, you're generally going to see them almost for certain on the first season or the first episode of each season and the last episode of each season. And then oftentimes they'll just have the writing staff and other scribes take a crack on it throughout the year. So seeing that this was a solo shot from him meant that we were going to go again for some big plot swings and character moments, and we were not disappointed, friends. We should just jump right into what they were attempting to accomplish, and Henry Alonso Myers said so in online interviews and the like. They wanted their best of both worlds. That was a prime mover. They loved the feeling it gave Star Trek viewers back then. Suddenly horrified to discover, wait, I have to wait 3 or 4 months to find out how this, gets resolved. And you can argue, because that happened back in 1989. Obviously, we'd had the Who Shot JR, and there'd been other, quote, cliffhangers before, but I think Best of Both New Worlds, and I would argue the first season finale of Twin Peaks, really cemented the idea for viewers of like, let's leave as many open plot threads as we can. Let's have people hanging by their fingernails over a canyon. Are they going to pull themselves out or plunge into the abyss? And the more the merrier. In fact, I would still argue that the first season finale of Twin Peaks has close to 15 different mini cliffhangers built into a single hour of television, which I think, it may not be a record, but to the viewing experience, it just left your nerves a jangled mess. And again, having to wait all summer for any kind of resolution, it was torture. This one has about 4 or 5 embedded within it, and things we're going to be asking ourselves, and that's probably where I'll start first before we do our direct comparison to Best of Both Worlds. Of the open plot lines, gentlemen, that this episode that Hegemony brings up, which one are you most on the edge of your seat to see resolved? Is it the abduction of key crew personnel like Lon, Mabenga, Sam, Erica in the hands of the Gorn? Is it Captain Batel's impregnation, if you will, with Gorn eggs, and she's got a limited time to live? Is it Captain Pike's fateful decision? Do I save my existing crew and ship right now and live to fight another day, or do I stay in the fight and try and rescue the other crewmates who, again, were just abducted, right from underneath our nose here? Is it, Spock and Chapel? They're back on, maybe. So there's a lot that we have to look forward to whenever the 3rd season launches, which may not be for some time now with the ongoing writer strikes and SAG-AFTRA, and we do support both unions to get a fair deal. Hashtag, creative strong. But which one of these plot lines that they left wide open, or even one from earlier in the season that we didn't get time to address into, the Mabenga, revelations to Pike, or other things that were tripped upon. Lon and Kirk, I think, have kind of been resolved for now. But which storylines are you looking most forward to when season 3 resumes? And let's start with Uther.
That season 1 finale of Twin Peaks, probably the greatest ever. I like that. I agree with that 100%. Just because, to your point, there were so many things out there that you really didn't know which way it was going to go, and I think it was kind of revolutionary for the time too, which we've discussed several times, and to me is what helps make it one of the greatest TV series ever. I want to know what's going to happen with Batel, because these writers have thrown so many curveballs at us. I wouldn't be surprised if she lives and Chapel comes up with a way to save her. But then again, I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't make it and it drastically affects Pike and maybe leads him down the road to his injury. I don't know. That could be something that drives him in that direction. So I think that's the one, because we know what Pike, I think Pike's going to obviously try and save his crew, right? There's no way he's going to leave them there. I think we know the answer to that. He also probably has a little bit of that revenge going for what happened with Batel, so he's going to want to do something about that. I'm also curious if we're going to see either Lon or Erica bite the dust at some point in the first couple episodes of the new season. Kind of curious to see what happens there too, because who's the only, well, now I'll hold off on that cast member part. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more later in this episode. So I think the Patel piece, I would like to kind of see what happens there. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Urza?
I like that. I like that a lot. I'm actually going to throw myself a little Strange New Worlds curveball. I'm really interested to see how they develop the actual relationship with the Gorn. I think Pike is going to make the strenuous decision to retreat and leave the crew there, and that's going to weigh heavier on him than I think Patel's going to make it. I do think we're going to see her character get killed off eventually, but I think they're going to end up saving her, but she may end up with some kind of permanent issues, which will eventually lead to her demise. Likewise, I think that we're going to find that the captured crew is what sort of breaks the ground with the Gorn in terms of establishing some kind of diplomatic relation and understanding between the species, where the hegemony, kind of sort of subtextual, but also like foretextual in this episode. It was like, we don't know enough about the Gorn at this point. It's a very delicate piece. We don't know how they operate, what makes them tick, but we do know that they operate on solar cycles, right? So I think that there's going to be some discovery with the captured crew. I think that's going to be the direction that takes, and I think Spock and Chapel are going to be instrumental in saving Batel. Spock, I think, is going to have to do something very Vulcan-y in the future. I think what we'll see is some neurological, shall we say, damage after the egg implantation. So I think they'll excise the egg, but I think there'll be some unforeseen neurological connection between the host and the egg, which is why she was able to get the Gorn to not attack them, and why she sort of knew that if she faced it down, it would not attack. So that's just me turning some gears, breaking off some rust.
Yeah.
Likewise, I think what we're going to find is the adult Gorn, which we've got our first glimpse of in this episode, which is far more, shall we say, within cognitive reasoning than the younger Gorn that tend to be more animalistic. I think we're going to see that there's an even more evolved version of Gorn, let's say not a warrior class, but a command class Gorn. And that's what I think your captured crew are going to run into, and that's going to be more of the Gorn that we might be used to from the original series. No tail, bipedal, maybe slow, but still strong. Unaffected by rocks thrown overhead. But yeah, I that's the one I'm really most curious about, because I know the end moment where Pike is supposed to make a decision, and he's like stuck in this, like, I'm the captain, I have to divorce myself from my feelings, I have to, do what's right by Starfleet, I have to also do what's right by my people, my ship, and that's what he's struggling with. And by the way, absolutely beautifully written and perfectly acted by Anson Mount. My hat's off to that gentleman, because my goodness, I mean, I've seen a lot of great acting performances in my short day of 35 years, but this was something that, like, I felt every bit of tension communicated just on his face. And I think that's, of all the other cliffhangers that were set up and all the other ways that this episode put them out there, that to me, which it was intended to be, but that to me was just incredibly powerful. And I think that's the misdirection, is you're kind of expecting him to throw down the gauntlet and be like, unleash hell, and kind of do the, shall we say, William Riker, with the fire. I think instead we're going to get the opposite. We're going to get a diplomatic Pike. We're going to get the Pike that plots and plans out the future very carefully because he is so aware of his own future. He knows he's not going to die here. He knows the Enterprise is not going to be compromised here. He knows that it gets to the end point that he saw way back when now. So he knows he can just plot this out because he knows the involved parties that are around for his quote-unquote demise. So we're just moving towards Talos at this point. So I think we're going to see subterfuge, we're going to see a lot more intrigue in the next season, and it's going to be these red herring cliffhangers that get resolved in relatively straightforward ways, which I think is unexpected, to be honest with you. I think we're all expecting some kind of a big space battle or, fighting your way out of the pyramid ship like you'd see in a Stargate episode. I think instead we're going to get really kind of almost spy movie-esque, negotiating, diplomacy, real Starfleet stuff, which to me is novel, right? I mean, how often in a show these days you see just like the knockdown, drag out, the very Western style showdown at high noon kind of thing? This is going to be far more cerebral, more Roddenberry-esque, where it's going to be the utopian future that they're trying to work towards. They're coming off the Klingon War. They want to get to a peaceful expansion of the Starfleet influence, and I think making good with the Gorn hegemony, which we know from obviously Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, the Gorn hegemony it's still there. It's just not quite as, shall we say, warlike. So I'm really excited for that. I have to say, I was not expecting a cliffhanger, but the 90s kid in me was tickled absolutely pink.
Those are all excellent points. The idea, I love the vulnerability of Pike in that moment because, as I said, the Riker with a steel jaw, Mr. Worf, fire. Like that again, and that's your last shot for 4 months, and you're like, oh my god. Now it turns out that whatever they were doing against the Borg there, I forgot whatever their move was. It quickly faded away. They weren't able to make any real impact. But you didn't know that for 3 or 4 months, but it was the nice contrast. We don't see, successfully anyways, a lot of indecision. And I don't want to make that seem like weakness, but there's a man calculating the possibilities in real time about what is the right thing to do. And I think, to Ursa's point, this show, even with the Borg, as this franchise, they've never just wanted to, I think maybe even, they're even tried it with the Dominion in some episodes. They want to try and reach across the aisle somehow. Now, I mean, some of those efforts are met in vain and fruitless, but, Star Trek's messaging is, yes, can't we all just get along? So, and I think there's more drama to be mined out of reaching that uneasy piece than there is to just give us a one-dimensional, species that I think... Ursa, we talked at length when the Gorn were introduced in the first season. Their resemblance to, the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, or, the Demogorgons from Stranger Things. Basically just primal, carnivorous, creatures that you can't reason with, you can't logically, dictate to. And so by introducing, as you say, sort of a next stage Gorn in this episode, that they still have to dispatch through a violent confrontation, we're at least now given the possibility that, hey, maybe we can understand them better. Or even, you bring up the solar flares. I mean, it's buried in the technobabble, but it's very clear what you're there. If they figured out a way to regulate that might curb some of those murderous impulses, or, I mean, it's almost as if, when a werewolf sees a full moon and just can't stop their hunger, if Starfleet came up with a way to mitigate or, control those solar outbursts that might not drive the Gorn population into like a frenzy where we must hunt and feed, and that might be the solution, a technical solution that leads to a diplomatic outreach that may or may not ultimately bear obviously fruit. So that's something that I'm looking forward to there. But yes, to just present them as, we're running on four legs and eating everything in sight like the xenomorph, I took the elevated Gorn we saw here more like Predator, in the sense that it's still an alien species, and it still has these instincts to hunt and protect and kill, but it's it has a more advanced intelligence than the xenomorphs, for example. So that was interesting. I don't know if the writers and the producers, were doing that deep a dive, but you kind of had the best of Alien and Predator here, sort of in this species. So that was a thought that came to me there. I think there's an opportunity to call a cast member. I haven't heard again of anybody who is unhappy, and I think they'd be unhappy if they were booted off the show, given the first 2 seasons reception. But when you have Lon and Mabenga, Erica and Sam, amongst others, who are prisoners, there is that opportunity, because we're adding legacy cast members now at a not regular basis, but certainly with a little bit of frequency. And we need to get into Montgomery Scott, who was introduced here and played by an actual Scotsman, a Star Trek first. They weren't just affecting a Scottish brogue, but they were 100% had that bloodline there. So, and his surprising connection to, well, not surprising if you think of her age, but with Palia being a student, that was a nice moment there. But here we've brought on yet another cast member. I think we're missing Bones and Sulu. To my early knowledge, is probably the only 2 that we haven't met in yet. So it's not just a question of giving Trek fans their favorite characters, just as they're starting off, losing the training wheels and marching forward. But there's going to have to open up some seats, because like I say, right now the helm is pretty crowded. So, with Erica, I would hope that they don't cut her character short. I would like to see more with her, just like all the rest of the crew. But they'll, eventually they're going to need a helmsman, obviously, and eventually there's going to be somebody new in sickbay, and eventually Montgomery Scott will be running engineering. So we have entrances, but we also have exits in which to ponder. Hopefully not for a few more. Go ahead.
They can bring Sulu in to sit. They can bring Sulu in to sit next to Erica, because if you've noticed, Una's been sitting at ops or whatever it is, wherever she's sitting. So I've noticed that they switch Una and that other, I can't remember the other character's name. She sits there sometimes as well with Erica, but you could theoretically bring Sulu in to learn under Erica, in a sense, under her tutelage. And maybe she gets promoted up or promoted out or something like that. I'm always thinking one of them's going to kick the bucket, but that doesn't necessarily have to happen for it to be effective, right? They can get promoted, or she could become a first officer somewhere else. There's always that possibility. But to kind of go back to what you were talking about, Anson Mount, and I was watching, I watched the Gorn episode from the original series, because I just wanted to see what the difference was, and I sent you guys that video of the Gorn slowly swinging and missing Kirk, which was just incredibly cheesy, but that's what it was back then, right? But then even flipping around, watching some early Next Gen and some early DS9, the advantage this show has, and we've kind of talked about this before, in my opinion, over everything else, is these actors know who they are as the characters. If you watch the first couple seasons of any Trek, there's always a discovery process of what is this character really going to wind up being, right? Every actor knows who they are in this series, and I think that's what's made it catch on so quickly. That's what's made it one of the top streaming shows across all the platforms, is because their acting syncs up completely with the writing, but that's because they know who they are as those characters. And I think that's extremely important. But with that being said, here's a question about Scotty. I feel like in the movies before this, where what's his name played Scotty? Why am I drawing a blank? He was
Simon
he was
Pegg.
in Shaun-
No, Simon Pegg.
So I feel like Simon Pegg trying to kind of turn Scotty into this comical figure more than he typically was. I feel like I'm seeing that again. Do you think that? Do you see him becoming more of this comical figure? Do you think they've done that with the character? Am I reading into it too much? Let me.
That's an interesting point. I think they're leaning into kind of the greenness of a rookie by making him sort of comical and like a goofy genius, right? But so is Palia. So it's a really nice segue, right? Because Hemmer was less comic. Well, he was still funny, but he was like less comical, more serious, but also like a genius type character. And I think that they're really kind of elevating that sort of position, right? Because we knew Palia's like just a temporary fill-in. And I'm excited to see Carol Kane coming back for more episodes because I absolutely adore her as an actress. But I think the interplay between those two moving forward, because I really think they could stick with that for the full third season. And it could be sort of the transition from, goofy genius who's just sort of out there like Palia to a little more dialed in senior officer like we see with James Doohan early TOS, where he's kind of calculated. He's like, we're not below taking a few insults, kind of thing, where like very like apt to duty, right? Because up until this point, he's just on a science ship. He's not really doing anything with higher purpose, let's say. And I think that's where Mr. Scott historically kind of found his niche, is like he was very to duty, he stayed at his post kind of thing. And I think that's something that, Mr. Scott's going to get exposed to in a big way with the Gorn War. And that's going to kind of dial back his sort of cheeky goofiness and give him a real life kind of harsh perspective. Now, how they bring that out of him, I think is, the beauty of the writers. And once again, of course, #CreativeStrong. But I do think that pulling that out of his character, not necessarily out of the actor himself, but out of the character on paper, is going to be a really interesting journey. Because I think, we've got Palia who can be very serious, but is always kind of wacky in a way, which is, Carol Kane, just amazing. She's going to probably be the one to sort of bring Scotty to that point. Like, obviously, you're one of my most talented students, but you have to learn to be less of a scientist and a little bit more of a tactician. A little less clever, a little more miracle worker, let's say. I look forward to that quite a bit. I was so stoked to see a true Scotsman playing Scotty, and also very stoked to see him have like these incredible genius moments. As soon as they found that little device to trap the Gorn, I was like, oh, is this who I think it is? And sure enough, I was like, oh, this is like the best payoff. Because there are so many ways to bring Mr. Scott into the series. They could have just easily been like, oh, we need a new chief engineer. Who's next up on the chart? Who's Montgomery Scott? Awesome. That would have been fine. But this was such a much better way of doing it, and completely out of the blue, unexpected. That's to do something that's unexpected in a Star Trek show. It's still like, we talk about it every week. We're just on our knees for these writers, but oh my gosh, how do they keep doing this? Like, they keep bringing us these familiar faces and familiar tropes and situations in novel ways that they don't even need to be surprising for me as a Trek fan to be like, oh, awesome, a trial episode, I love it. Or, oh, awesome, an encounter with an alien species where, somebody has romantic interest. Like, they're going to do that. But it's somehow going to feel fresh and exciting. And that's where, I think we'll talk about this potentially in another show. But I think that's where a lot of the sort of internet critics are identifying Star Trek as a flourishing show where other franchises, shall we say, are kind of floundering and looking for their identity. And I think this is just a lesson to all that you don't have to stray so far from what you're good at. It's just in how you present it. And I think Montgomery Scott's no difference, no exception. We know who Scotty is. It's just giving him to us in a way that we're going to be familiar with, but it's going to come across very novel. So I'm excited. I think that's going to be a good challenge, but these writers, they can do anything. I mean, I'm going to gobble it up every time.
I think that's interesting that you mention, sort of, again, the internet buzz. I think if you take a step back, the 10,000-foot view here, I think this show, this very specific Star Trek show, over the course of 2 seasons, and I think, a lot of that may have to do with their coverage of Subspace Rhapsody a week ago. But when you talk about buzz, right? I mean, Star Trek has a passionate fan base worldwide and has so for generations, and there's no denying that. But shows like Lower Decks, Prodigy, Discovery, even Picard, to some degree, like when the buzz was on Picard for season 3, I mean, we reveled in all of the Easter eggs and nostalgia, and isn't it great to see them back together, and they're still as vim and vigorous as ever. But that really played first and foremost to the passionate Star Trek fan base that has been, pining for this for a long time. But I think with this show, and I think, again, I saw a lot of this on the internets with the Subspace Rhapsody, because the show is less serialized, because they've already taken some big swings creatively in the first 2 seasons. I think this show is getting attention from some quarters that other shows like Discovery, like, it's very easy to dismiss it and say, oh, it's a Star Trek show. Of course the fans are going to watch, but I think Subspace Rhapsody opened it up where we had articles, on Daily Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Entertainment Weekly, some, the Vulture, Salon. I mean, there were non-Star Trek affiliated outlets that were covering this episode and saying, wow, look how well they pulled that off. And I think that only helps the profile of the show. I feel like this show, the confidence that we've been talking about from the writing and the acting and these characters and so forth, I think it's standing out. Like, I think this show has got sort of more of a spotlight on it that it's earned through 20 episodes than some of the other new shows, which are also, again, creatively pushing the envelope forward and giving us, again, Picard season 3 was, a masterclass in tying up, emotional and plot threads that we've been waiting for a very long time. But I think this show I think it's found an appeal, or at least it's found a willing audience beyond just your, straight run-of-the-mill Star Trek fan. I think other people are now saying, hey, I really like that episode, musical episode. I'm going to go check this out. So what would be a shame is if that momentum is crushed by an extended, delay in production. I mean, you obviously, you want to seize on that momentum, from an audience standpoint, and you don't want to wait a year and a half, 2 years to find out, what order is Pike about to give. So again, we hope that all of that gets resolved fairly and quickly. But I think, you guys can, you guys can sort of speak to this as lifelong, Trekkies. I mean, do you feel? I mean, does this show already sort of out of the gate? I mean, is it already taken a leap past, like early DS9? Because again, DS9 waited, 2 seasons more or less before they introduced the Dominion, and they waited until season 4 to introduce Worf, and Voyager was, doing its thing for, like, do you feel like Strange New Worlds, even if it's only a 5 or 6 season run in total, like, is this like, the most optimistic, I guess you might say, in terms of like, boy, these guys, never has a show found its footing so gracefully and elegantly as they're doing it. What do you say, Ursa?
Yes, not to steal Lord Uther's catchphrase, but I mean, top to bottom, I think absolutely this show has set itself apart from other Trek as finding success so quickly, and I think that's an absolute testament to the behind the scenes. You've got producers, directors, writing staff, and cast that. I mean, all the way down to like your boom guys and your lighting guys. I think everybody is as dialed in as you would ever want on a show. And it shows. The chemistry behind the scenes is absolutely key to what you've got going on the screen. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the first couple seasons of Next Generation or Voyager or Deep Space Nine. Those are great. Are they the strongest? No. I mean, there's good nuggets in there, but a lot of it was kind of like just establishing and world building. It's kind of like the first few chapters of a book. You don't want to get too into the weeds too quickly because you want to capture the interest and get you through to sort of the midsection or the build up to the climax of whatever story you're telling. Strange New Worlds, I think, in their 10 episode model in these 2 seasons, and I really do hope they go to the 20 episode model for the next season. One, because I think they could easily do it. Even if they kept it to the same sort of condensed storytelling, there's so much ground they could cover that they could do a lot more fun experimental episodes, both serious and comedic, and really just expand and pull things out of character acting that just would, I mean, absolutely blow minds, because they have the chemistry to do that. You look at a Deep Space Nine, which I think is a very good example, because I think that's one of the shows that had a little trouble getting its footing, but when it really took hold of its fan base and got into the heat of the moment in the mid to late 90s to its eventual climax, that show really had to find its identity. I mean, because you're on a space station, right? It's not just the interplay of a single crew, even though it's a single crew that you're focusing on. There's so many stories you could weave in, but they all have to sort of tell a serial arc. And at times it's a little ethereal, and they had to reach out and they tapped into every Star Trek trope. And, when we go through Deep Space Nine, we can get more in depth here, but the idea that, you would have 10 episodes to try and achieve what they achieved in 26, it's impossible. That you're asking way too much of a. I mean, even if that cast had been as dialed in as this cast is, let's say, you're too big. Your scale is too large to do that. Even a starship is a little too large. I think of Next Generation, the first couple seasons there. You really have to have that casted well to get to where you want to go. But you need a Tasha Yar. I hate to say it, but Tasha Yar is kind of the first plot thread that connects that crew to the eventual crew we know and love, right? Up until her very odd, sort of untimely death, like, that crew's not really melded together well. It's almost like they killed her off because they're like, look, this crew is not as connected as we need them to be. And part of that is they never established the characters in the roles that we know them as. I mean, Geordi LaForge doesn't become chief engineer until, like, season 4? Or something along those lines. I can't remember off the top of my head. But, they have that same situation here, except you're starting with a very gilded crew. Rescuing Una is just, it's the thread that ties that crew together. And brings La'an on board, and then now you're getting some of these legacy characters that are coming at lower rank who are going to be understudying, basically. And I think that's an amazing way to, mesh them into the existing fabric and give them that unity that really becomes the compelling part of why we watch. Again, Star Trek has always been the story of the people. Even though it's about the exploration, it's about how it impacts the relationships between these people. And unlike a show like Walking Dead, which is less about the zombies, more about the people, they're not marketing it as a zombie show. They're marketing it as this is a journey of the human experience show. And that's the Roddenberry vision that makes Star Trek special. And I don't care how many zombies or spin-offs you make, other shows will not ever achieve that as well, because it doesn't have that core connection of humanity. And other Star Trek shows even don't hit this out of the park so quickly. It takes a lot to build that up, and again, testament to the writers here to have that immediate impact. They're tapping into raw human emotion. Literally from the first seconds, because these people's stories. It's like, how do you make that compelling? You got to present it in a novel way. All stories have been told, right? So how do you tell it in a unique way? You give them exactly what they're thinking without, this third person, omniscient view. You play it out through character acting. And that, again, top to bottom, the synergy of this show is what makes it special. It's what makes it a top 10 streaming series every single week. It's going to be the continued success of this series. And, as far as the strikes go, the real reason I think any Star Trek fan should be all on board with #CreativeStrong is because you've got the perfect chemistry behind the scenes on this show. And if everybody can stay on the same page and achieve their fair compensation they very well deserve, it's a 5-year mission this crew is on, but there is no reason to limit it as such. Not to mention the fact, and there's already articles out there about this, I'm beating a dead horse already, but we've never been closer to an original series reboot, which I don't particularly care for reboots. Y'all can weigh in on this, but this is the first time I'll ever put my 2 cents in and say, honestly, I'm okay with if they want to continue into the original series territory after the Strange New Worlds threads play themselves out. However far they want to take this, if they're preserving the same cast, crew, production staff, and they want to just roll Strange New Worlds forward beyond Captain Pike into Captain Kirk, you bet it. You betcha. I will take that all day. That sounds awesome.
Yes.
There it is.
You want and Urza stole my thunder. Where I'm completely fine with that, because I was going to say, if you want true optimism, this rolls right into a reboot. And to me, it's not even a reboot. It's just a continuation of the story, because they can go and say, oh, this is the first 5-year mission under Kirk, and then maybe there was the second one, maybe that was the original series. I don't know. But to me, they can flow right into that. I would, that's me being optimistic that this would actually continue forward with that, like you're saying, with the idea of almost these understudies that are going to just naturally progress into those spots. I would be completely 100% on board with that if they did it, because this crew is so connected, and even Kirk, who's making these guest appearances, fits in with the crew. He does. He really does. Go ahead. You're going to say something there, Chet.
So there's a provocative sort of fork in the road here that I think both you and Ursa are kind of raising this idea. Let's call it a reboot, if you will. So I'm curious creatively, which of these two approaches us as fans might welcome more. The idea that we take a new set of adventures with new actors or these actors playing these familiar roles. So we have Kirk and Sulu and Bones and everybody, but the writers are trying to craft brand new side stories that we've never seen before that weren't really a part of the original series lore, or, and this is probably a little less likely but is very doable, the idea like when they rebooted The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents and so forth, back in the 80s and even later, they took old scripts, right, originally crafted for The Twilight Zone, and they put modern actors in it and put modern technology in it and tried to reinvent that classic tale from where we were at that point versus the 1960s and so forth. So another possibility they could do is to take actual original series episodes and put a tweak here and put a tweak there, but basically sort of refilm some of these classic shows using, the set of this Enterprise and the technology. And I mean, if you think of it, it was a failed experiment, but it certainly is, Gus Van Sant's shot-by-shot remake of Psycho that he did in 1998. I mean, if you knew the two films intimately, I mean, it was what they promised. It was a shot-by-shot, but it was Vince Vaughn instead of Anthony Perkins, and it was Anne Heche instead of Janet Leigh, and so I'm curious, as a fan, would you want to see like what they're doing with Strange New Worlds, which is basically just original tales, only we have a crew that we're very familiar with, and these are things we didn't get to see in the original series, or would you even want to see like a City on the Edge of Tomorrow but done with 21st century effects and brand new cast members playing those classic roles and maybe putting a little spin on it there. It may not be a slavish word for word dialogue replay, but enough borrowed and repurposed for sort of a new generation. I'm curious which one would be more exciting for you guys. Like I say, original tales with a familiar crew, or taking familiar tales and giving it that polish, that sheen of what this current Trek looks like. Go ahead, Uther. Which one would be more appealing to you?
I would see. I feel like they kind of already tried to do that with remastering the original series, because they tried to update the special effects and a few things like that. See, I give them their own adventures. I think that's where I'm kind of going with that. Because, I mean, then what are you going to do? Remake the movies? Which I don't think that should be done, because they tried to do that with Wrath of Khan, and obviously that did not go very well. It was some of the worst movie ever I have seen, besides This Is Pod Racing. So, with all that being said, I think it needs to go its own path with this crew, and it also makes me wonder if I'm let me give you a little comparison. If I'm coaching and I see a team on TV run a great offense, and now I'm going to take that with my 8th graders and have them run that offense, it might kind of look like it, but my players aren't going to feel comfortable trying to recreate something that's already out there. And I really question if these actors who are having a lot of success on their own right now, taking scripts that are already out there, or episodes that have already been made and remaking them, would affect their acting performance. It's like it's already been done. And I just don't see the purpose of that, but that's all I have to say about that.
Got it.
That is fair.
I'm pretty well in agreement with Uther on this, but I'm going to take it just a little step further. I like the idea of a first 5-year mission under Kirk. And here's where I think they'd have some unique opportunity. Obviously, after the Captain Pike disaster, there's going to be some interim, like, Enterprise crew dealing with the aftermath of that, right? Probably Earth-centric, or dealing with, Starbase type stuff where, like, oh boy, what are we going to do with the Enterprise? It needs a captain. There could be some, fill-in type episodes to kind of flesh out that background where maybe Una steps up into the captain's chair for a little while, and maybe her first officer is Kirk. And then, so on and so forth for however many episodes or a season or two. And then maybe, you get Kirk's first few, years as captain before, like, the 5-year mission in the original series. I think you could almost play this up into... I do think you need to remake The Cage. I think that's one episode that they have to do, right? Obviously, that would fall before, the Pike disaster. I think that's unavoidable. You have to, whether it's a shot-by-shot remake or, they kind of do their own thing. Honestly, I don't care either way. I think you have to do it to bring a reasonable conclusion to this Pike story. I think it'd be really cool to see a shot-for-shot remake of that, just because, the dialogue could change and be a little more modern, a little less of its era, let's say. I do think that the interesting thing you could do, shall we say, in those ensuing years, to the Kirk-led Enterprise we see in the first episode of TOS, is build up some of those relationships as the existing crew from Strange New Worlds sort of peels off and goes into wherever they end up. I do think that could be, and it's not a TOS reboot. I think that's still Strange New Worlds territory. I think that's the crew kind of, because they're pretty unified, they're pretty under Kirk in from the jump in the original series. I think you just kind of roll into that, and then you kind of taper it off and be like, okay, now you kind of know where this is headed. I think that's a great way to do it. I agree that they shouldn't really remake classic episodes. I don't think you're really achieving anything with that. I think that's where sort of the novel approach to what they're doing would kind of wear off, and it's like you're rehashing old material. Like, that to me doesn't feel right. I think the creative power they have behind this show, they could easily come up with some new material that's going to vibe really well. That being said, lest we forget, when TV shows were made back in the day, there were a lot of scripts produced for them that just went in the garbage, So there are probably dozens, at least, of old Star Trek material that they were episode ideas that never got used, that they could just pick it up, rework it, make it their own, credit the original writers, of course, but, change it up to make it more modern, and it's just stuff they never used. Like, in this episode, Kirk and Uhura, like, have to do this thing, or, Spock and Uhura, or whatever. Likewise, as long as they don't introduce Chekhov, because Chekhov is introduced later in the original series, they're fine. They can't bring in Chekhov. And that's the one character, like, I'm going to miss. Like, I wish they could bring him in some capacity. And they could do it as, like, a cadet Chekhov who's on another ship, kind of like Kirk is now. But that's, like, the last character that I think hardcore Star Trek fans are going to want to see, that, we may run into kind of dealing with that issue. But that's your ensuing 5 years with Kirk, is like, oh, we're running into my old ship, the Farragut, and oh, they got a new cadet at Ops, and it's Chekhov, and Anton Chekhov. That's cool. I like that. Let's do a joint mission and some diplomatic thing with whatever Ryza. Ryza seems to fit because it's Kirk, of course. I just think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here, and the beauty again of this show is, it's not self-limiting, in as much as, like, we know where Pike's story goes. There's still a lot of Pike's story we don't know. There's still a lot of Kirk's story we don't know. There's a lot of every character on the show. We really don't know the resolution, or we don't know as much about them in the original series as maybe we would like to. I also think you do have the opportunity to make a big screen movie. With either the Pike crew or the, first iteration of the Kirk crew, whatever floats your boat at that point. We don't know how Mbenga transitions off the Enterprise, because we know he appears in the original series. So it's like there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there, and I really don't think they should ever limit themselves, because even if they play out the TV series, there's no reason why they couldn't do a Strange New Worlds movie afterwards, like we have with the Next Gen crew, because there's plenty of stories in between the Pike disaster and Pike going back out into space. They could do a movie, as long as the actors are, young enough, kind of thing. Like, not to be ageist, but I think you've got just tremendous opportunity with this series that I think every Star Trek franchise series is just on the verge of cracking into this, like, you're cementing the legacy for Star Trek for the next 50 years. And I think that's what we're seeing now. It's what you saw with the original series, and lest we forget the animated series set up, Lower Decks in a big way. And I think that's it's just beautiful, the things that they can do here, and they happen to have probably the best writing crew of any television series right now, who all get along and all are dedicated to Trek. And that's, I want to say it's not surprising, but it's a little surprising because we got the Kelvin timeline. So I turn that to Chet Donnelly for some further thoughts, of course.
No, as a writer, obviously, I'm always more for being able to chart your own path and find your own way. But I can see the appeal of giving some of these storylines a fresh coat of paint and so forth. I have long had several ideas for feature remakes. I think if you're going to do a remake, I think the impetus has to be that there are things we can improve. It's not just an ego thing to say, oh, I think I can do Best of Both Worlds, better. Like, I think Best of Both Worlds actually has to have something that needs addressing, or, that you can advance before you try to tackle something like that. And there are films that I've seen in my life that had flaws, that were unsatisfying or missed the mark or came so close but couldn't stick the landing. Like, those to me are always more exciting to think about remaking, and maybe 1994's Street Fighter. There are things you can improve upon, and perhaps give a new audience a different approach than was previously stretched. So that's where I came down. A couple of quick hits for me before we wrap up the journey. The actor who we hope we'll be seeing around the Enterprise for some time, who plays Montgomery Scott, is Martin Quinn. So add him to your databanks as the Scotsman, with a baby face and a knack for creating cloaking devices. And I also want to give a shout out to the title sequence, both the visuals and the repurposed Star Trek theme, composed by Jeff Russo, who has done the music for Picard and Discovery, and he's kind of the new composer that James Horner or Jerry Goldsmith or Michael Giacchino of this new wave of streaming shows. But I think it's one of my favorite title sequences, seconded probably only to DS9, which had a majesty with Dennis McCarthy and the visuals going around the space station and so forth. I commented when the show first launched that it reminded me of Voyager, with the ship moving through nebulas and a lot of motion and so forth. But the music really, it's at once very, very familiar, but also urgent and propulsive. And oftentimes when you see streaming shows, they give you the opportunity to skip this and get right to the show. I have never skipped the title sequence, even while sitting alone on my couch watching the latest episode to drop, because I think it's just a great 2 minutes of cinema slash, the combination of the special effects and how they've done the score. So I think it does deserve a lot of praise, being right up there. It holds your attention. And I always like to say, oh, here's the shot where the Enterprise comes around the moon, and there it is and even the Lower Decks crossover. They kind of spoofed it, if you remember. They added little animated bits to it while retaining the original's flair. So I think that's worthy of it. Great job, guys. And it's sort of endangered. Used to be that television theme songs and intros were all the rage, and then they're like, nah, screw it. We'll do the Law and Order approach and do it, in 30 seconds and bam. But I do love a good title sequence. If you can tell me emotionally and visually what I should expect for the next 46 minutes, and I think this show has done that very, very well. So, and I think the Enterprise has never looked better. So, and I still think that if we could go back in time and fix something, it would be Star Trek V's visual effects, and we can just hijack the crews working on these shows here and just be like, Shatner would have had a classic, that ranged through all the land. But anyways, I'm still working on that time machine, and we'll try and get back there and tell him, Bill, you got to work with you. We've got the answer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, of all the praise we've had for this show thus far, that's the one we kind of forget about. An intro sequence. You really don't see it that often these days. And I think that's where Star Trek, quite frankly, has done an amazing job. I think of The Mandalorian, which, great music, but the intro to me is, a little neither here nor there. It's kind of just like I've skipped that one a lot because it's like, doesn't really give me a whole lot, and I don't get a lot out of it. But the Star Trek Strange New Worlds intro, honestly, like all the Star Trek show intros that I've seen of the shows that I love, like, I always loved Next Generation. I'll always love Voyager's intro. There's some nostalgia there that just plays well. It is just inviting, it's warm, it's sort of familiar territory, even if it's new. And sometimes they add those little novel tweaks, like with the animation for the crossover episode. And I like it when they change just a little bit to see if people are paying attention. I think that's clever. And I think that's something they should certainly continue doing, because it's truly wonderful. And if they do a big screen adaptation, a film with this crew, which I absolutely think they should do, and I think it should go to theaters, and everybody should go out and watch it 7-8 times. I would love for them to do a long intro sequence like we see in Generations, or some of the early Star Trek films, because the Enterprise, really deserves kind of that whole aspect. It should be a way you fall in love with the architecture of a show, and it should convey that emotional depth and that sort of command structure love of what they're doing. And that's something that I think in a lot of other series is kind of lost. And we'll see what happens with future sci-fi streaming shows, but I think that's something that, as a creative, you can't discount moments like that. That connection with your audience is really built there. And Star Trek, of course, being famous for it with the Final Frontier speech. And it's something that I think future Star Trek shows, like hopefully Legacy, will continue with. I'd love to hear Jerry Ryan saying space, the final frontier. That to me would be just incredible. I think that's where I get real excited. So, all that being said, we have boldly gone through Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. And, gentlemen, I think this has probably been one of the best seasons of any Star Trek series, of any show, really, that I've ever seen. I'd put it right up there with Star Trek Picard Season 3. So, we're going to do our rating, but we're going to do it a little differently this week. Of course, we're going to do the episode out of 7 warp cores, but I think it's time we do a retrospective on the season. Out of 7 warp cores. Now, we've broken the warp core barrier a few times. Maybe we're all travelers, but let's just see where we fall out on season 2 as a whole. And what we haven't done thus far is we've not started with my rating. So this episode, we're going to start with my rating out of 7 warp cores for this episode, and out of 7 warp cores on the season as a whole. This episode, of course, is a cliffhanger, so I think no matter what, you have to admit, it does leave some questions, some aches for more, some maybe dissatisfaction in a way, but not in a bad way, if you catch my drift. Like, it's the antissa part that you're waiting for the patient. And I have to say, I ate it up like hotcakes. Everything about this episode from top to bottom felt like a perfect Star Trek show. It did really ring the original series episode encounter with the Gorn, with Kirk. It had a lot of similarities, which made me nostalgic. It also made me go back and watch it, like Lord Uther, to just sort of reorient myself on how did this exactly turn up. And I have to say the tricorders are just, I gotta say, those original series tricorders just make me laugh. But I loved every minute of it. I love the characterizations. I absolutely adore Montgomery Scott. They could not have picked a more perfect actor for that role. And I think every cliffhanger moment, including, the sort of subtextual, how do we get to know the Gorn without killing each other, which I think is very Roddenberry, very Trek. It's a 7 out of 7 for me, suffice to say. Long story short. Long story long. 7 out of 7. I think, again, they've nailed a perfect Star Trek episode, as it should be on the season closer. And season 2 as a whole, for me, is a break of the warp core limits. I think this is an 8 out of 7 for me on the whole. Very few episodes this season were less than a 7, and a few were tremendously more than a 7. I think you don't typically see a series get a perfect score, and this is a certified fresh, if you will, across the board. But yeah, 8 out of 7. There was no moment, even me, a very anti-musical person, I loved the musical episode. I really hope they put the soundtrack out on vinyl. Like, I will pick that up for sure. And I really hope that there's a fair, equitable outcome to the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strike shortly. Obviously take the time, get it right. Let's make it last, because I want to see every last person involved with this show come back soon, and I can't wait for the creative just surge that we're going to see in season 3. And I'll turn it over to Chet.
So there are always, when you track these things, in some people's estimations, there's always, rising and falling within a season of a show. And some of that can be avoided if you do a heavily serialized show, because you're just following one narrative throughout the season and how the characters respond to it. It's much more, I think, of a higher bar to clear when you have these standalone shows that sometimes are butting up against each other in terms of tone. Charades with Spock and the Comedy of Manners with his in-laws, or Subspace Rhapsody with its all singing, all dancing premise, versus Under the Cloak of War, the very heavy Mabenga, can people be truly given a second chance, or Hegemony, with all of the plot narratives and thrust. So I look back on each of the 10 episodes of season 2, and I don't see that filler. I don't see that one episode where you're sort of saying, all right, well, they're just sort of on the hamster wheel here what's the show, when's it going to kick into the next gear. Go back to Lon and Kirk running around Toronto in the early century, or go back to the Lotus Eaters, where the crew is losing their memories and Erica has to pull them out. Like, you can just, each episode on its own was a standout in terms of trying to advance, Trek legend. And when you think that they pulled it all off again with just the 10 under their belts, for this batch, I mean, you do tip your caps. So I think, hegemony, leaving it, sort of wide open. I'll go 6.5, because that addresses the Urza Master point that we don't have a complete picture yet. So that's not to say that they didn't execute perfectly here on a cliffhanger, but because we need to know what the other shoe is going to drop, what that's going to mean to really be able to, and then you can retroactively go back and say, oh yeah, that's a pure 7. So I'll go 6.5 on the episode. I think the season, putting strain on those warp core, fluid dynamics and the like. I can agree with an 8. I can agree that it is a clear step above what we would probably consider to be the ceiling for great, compelling television overall. And like I say, I dare anyone to find sort of a weak spot, or, I mean, yeah, there might have been moments in an episode where we kind of looked around the room and said, yeah, but I can't think of any that come immediately to mind where, like, man, they really, went off the rails there in episode 6 when Spock and Chapel, kissed. Like, even any minor imperfections or quibbles were quickly swept away by the big picture here. So let's go 6.5 for the episode. Let's go 8 for the second season. And bravo to everybody who was involved. You've done a hell of a job.
6 out of 7 on the episode, just because a little bit too much aliens for me. Even like having the tracking thing that tracks the incoming Gorn.
Yeah.
And it's it's probably a homage to Aliens, obviously, or when the Gorn was up in the ceiling and the tail comes down, and it was very alien-y, xenomorph kind of thing. So I struggle with that just a little bit. I also kind of felt like it was a little bit of we kind of seen it before with the Borg in terms of making specific weapons to counter a specific species or enemy in a sense. But then again, I guess you would do that to be prepared. So I get it. I also do like how Una, I think it was Una, was describing what zombies were. And I felt that was a little bit of a side swipe at The Walking Dead, which I thought was great. So there's little things that these writers do. And that's why, like, even with the Gorn being alien-like, that's I mean, to me, it's purposeful because these writers are better than it just kind of being a coincidence. Yeah, I was going to say 7 out of 7 on the season, but yes, 8 out of 7. This series could have very well, along with Picard season 3, saved Star Trek or brought it back quicker than I thought was going to happen, because it's cyclical, right? Star Wars has been cyclical in a sense. I think Marvel's going through that now, where they had peaked and they're on a really bad downturn, and maybe they're starting to make a little bit of a comeback, but it's because there's oversaturation. And I think I shared the article with you guys too, that they're even alluding to Star Trek being a little oversaturated, and they're going to pull back. But I think Strange New Worlds is going to survive that pullback, because that, to me, that's what's pushing this forward, along with Lower Decks, it seems like, as well. So I think you're going to see Star Wars do the same thing. There's talk out there, which we'll get into this with the Graying Jedi, that they're not even going to have a season 4 of The Mandalorian. They're just going to go right into the movie with Ahsoka being a part of it, et cetera, because, again, there's this thing out there that it's oversaturated. I think Trek is on a good path. I can't wait for season 3. It's kind of sad we're gonna have to wait a little while. Special effects, both seasons have just been, it's like going to the movie theater and seeing special effects. It's that good. This episode was no different. Yeah, so more Strange New Worlds, please.
Love it. Couldn't agree more. And as we have before, and will in the future, we have the next steps to consider here, because this is the season finale with no new Trek coming for some time, yet to be determined. Our next episode, I think it feels only natural, should take us through to the next new Star Trek, of course. And what do you think, fellas? Do we leave this as a surprise? Will episode number 29 of the Warp Core podcast be a surprise as to what we're talking about? Or do we announce now our intentions? I'm going to put it to a vote. I want to, let's say, a qapla' if we leave it a surprise. And let's say if we tell them now. So all those in favor of leaving it as a surprise, say qapla'. Oh.
Yeah, there we go. As always, we are in agreement.
In agreement. So we all the Klingon guttural. So I tell you what, Star Trek fans, Warp Core fans, and we have millions, Lord Uther, and millions of Warp Core podcast fans. We will be discussing, and I tell you guys, I've been waiting for this. Oh, I've been waiting for this. We will be going through Star Trek 1967, the original series. From the episode 1, The Cage, all the way through the final episode, until, of course, we get to New Trek and can get back on the journey to Strange New Worlds. And I feel it right here. Can't wait. As always, we stand with SAG-AFTRA and the WGA. May they come to a peaceful, equitable, and favorable conclusion soon. But we have boldly went where no Warp Core podcast has gone before, and that is through all of Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. We leave you with this, as always: live long and prosper.